Hey everybody, this is Todd from Industrial Comfort. Let me help you brag at your next cocktail party by showing you how to make one of these cheese knives. So let's start bladesmithing. To get started, I grab a piece of 3/32 by 1.5 inch steel stock. This is 1084 steel, which is a very easy steel to heat treat. I then use a shop pencil to sketch out the rough design that I'm looking for, which in this case is a cleaver design. I take the steel over to my metal bandsaw and cut out the rough design. If you don't have a metal bandsaw, you can use an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel. I'm over at the belt grinder where I'm grinding the steel down to the final shape of the cleaver. The next step involves putting the blade in a jig that I made so that we can grind the bevel and ensure that we have a consistent bevel on both sides of the blade. I use my calipers to etch a line through the center of the blade. This way I'll know exactly how far to grind on either side of the blade to get a symmetric bevel. After I finish contouring the cleaver, I bring it over to the drill press where I drill two 5/32 holes, which will serve as the holes that the pins will slide through to hold the handle together. To give the cleaver its true iconic look, I drill a 5/16 hole in the corner of the blade. I bring the blade over to a wooden block that I have locked in my vise and drive two nails through the holes that I've drilled for the handle to begin the sanding process. Now I wrap a piece of sandpaper around a wooden block while I'm sanding and make sure to use a lot of lubricant. In this case I'm using WD-40. I start with 220 grit and work my way up to 600 grit. Obviously, the higher the grit, the higher the shine you're going to have. Now, personally, I prefer to do most of my sanding before the heat treat, as the metal is a lot softer and easier to sand. I'm now going to heat treat the blade, which is one of my favorite parts of blade making. The idea here is that you want to get the steel up to an exceptionally high temperature and then very quickly drop that temperature by quenching it in oil. So you can tell that the steel is at the appropriate temperature when it's a very bright orangey color and it loses its magnetism. Once that happens, you're ready to dip it into the oil. And this will change the molecular structure of the steel, which creates a much harder steel. Moving the blade back and forth across the flame will allow you to keep a consistent temperature across the blade. There are many different oils that you can use for your heat treat or your quench. In this case, I like to use Park's No. 50 Quench oil because it doesn't require any preheating like canola or vegetable oil would. And it also doesn't foul the same way that those oils do, so I can use this time and time again. Now that we have a very hard yet brittle blade, we want to start the process of tempering, which yet again changes the molecular structure to create a much more resilient yet hard blade. And to do that, we stick it in the toaster oven at 400 degrees for several hours. After tempering, we bring the blade back over to the wood sanding block and continue the sanding process. This will remove any carbon buildup from the Quench, as well as give the blade its final finish. Before sanding the other side of the blade, I coat the bottom of it with a piece of painter's tape to prevent any scratching. Quick trip over to the buffing wheel using some white diamond to give this blade its final finish. I select some walnut wood to use as the handle. I then stack the two scales that I've cut and use the blade as a template so that I can drill consistent holes through both pieces of wood at the same time. I take the wood scales over to the belt grinder because I want to be able to contour the section of the handle that I'm not going to be able to contour once the scales are epoxied to the blade. It's time to assemble the knife, so I mix up some 5-minute epoxy, coat both scales with the epoxy, and drive the pins through, and then clamp to let it cure. I always have some acetone on hand, that way I can wipe any residual epoxy that may spread beyond the top of the handle. After the epoxy has had time to set, we bring it over to the belt sander to begin contouring the handle. Before putting the blade in the vise so that I can hand sand, I coat the blade with some painter's tape to prevent any scratching. I hand sand the handle until I get the desired finish. I start with 220 grit and work my way up to 600 grit. After I finish sanding the handle, I apply several coats of True Oil, which tends to be my finish of choice. It goes on really easily, dries very quickly, and produces a nice high shine. Because 1084 is a high carbon steel and is not stainless, I make sure to coat with oil to prevent oxidation. And here's our finished cheese knife. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks.